Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. My name is Gulzar, and I'm on the marketing team here at Chef Progress. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A section at any time, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any additional programs you might have open or browser sessions, as webinars are bandwidth intensive. And finally, as always, this webinar is being recorded, and an on-demand version of the presentation will be available by tomorrow. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Tim, over to you.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'll start off with a bit of an introduction. I'm going to get my mouse in the right place. My name is Tim Smith. I am a product manager here at Chef for Chef Infra. We're also going to be hearing today from Trevor Hess. He is a senior product manager here at Chef as well. So you're in good hands. This is going to be our agenda for today. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of infrastructure management, how that plays into Chef Infra today and the role of policies going forward. We'll talk a little bit about our compliance offering, how you can manage that today using Chef Infra and Chef Inspect together as a single solution. We're going to talk about our new compliance phase and then give some next steps and take some time for Q&A. Hopefully people have some good questions for us. About this series, right? We're all here today. In the middle, February 25th, we're going to talk about compliance. We have a cook style recording that we did previously that's up on our YouTube. I believe it's also on our blog. You can see that. We have one more webinar coming up on March 18th. We're going to be talking about testing cookbooks quickly with Docker. That's going to be going into kitchen docking and how you can use that to really accelerate your cookbook pipelines and make sure you have infrastructure at scale. And I'm sure we'll have a few more webinars, but so far these have been pretty great and been fun, and hopefully everybody agrees at the end of today that they want to come back to the next one. So let's start talking about that evolution of infrastructure management. This isn't really about where Chef Infra is, but about where our industry is and the changes we've seen in how we manage infrastructure as companies. We've had a lot of kind of patterns that have popped up over the last 10 years, a lot of shifts and changes. What we have that we can talk about previously now is the old way. Seemed pretty cool at the time. This is kind of where I started at as in the industry. I was a NOC administrator first, racking and stacking servers, right? Building things up by hand, using Excel spreadsheets as you crash cart servers, RDPing in, maybe at best, SSHing in, hand configuring systems. We all know the problems of this. You know, we all know where this fell over. Humans are super fallible. Humans don't scale very well, and really, you just got in a situation where you kind of had an eventually consistent infrastructure, right? Not where business needs to be, and certainly not where high velocity businesses want to be. Thankfully, we had a lot of really great and smart people in the industry. Some thought leaders, people like Adam Jacob, started pushing the idea of infrastructure as code. We saw the rise of the DevOps movement really in about 2010. We started to see that come out. And that's the idea of, you know, why don't we just treat this infrastructure the same way we've been treating development processes, right? Let's bring some of those best practices into our infrastructure. We'll manage that as code, we'll automate it, and we'll start actually thinking about this as a process. We'll build out pipelines and we'll pipeline what our infrastructure looks like. And this has been, you know, hugely successful. Anybody here is probably a user of Chef in some form. You're all utilizing this in your infrastructures to really get to that high velocity goal that everybody has. But there's a bit of a missing link here, and that's kind of the big gotcha that probably everyone coming to this webinar has experienced, and that's security and compliance. Where does security and compliance fit into this? They don't, right? They don't in this traditional model, and that's really because of where this idea of DevOps came out of, right? This wasn't coming out of banks and government and healthcare. This was coming out of the hip startups of 2010. And those hip startups didn't have compliance concerns. And, you know, honestly, you really probably didn't have the security concerns they probably should have had at the time. And taking that existing model, the traditional DevOps model of having a single pipeline for your infrastructure, it really doesn't allow for things like continuous integration and continuous deployment because we have known stop points here. We have security teams getting involved. We have compliance teams and audits getting involved. And those things really slow down this dream we have of a really fast pipeline. And those security needs have really shifted kind of what it means to manage our infrastructure, right? In 2021, it isn't just the regulated industries that have security and compliance concerns. Really, we all do. There hopefully isn't a company out there that doesn't have concerns about security within their infrastructure. And that has kind of changed how we manage that infrastructure. It isn't just an idea of traditional configuration management and be done with it. It's more about how that configuration management works in with compliance, with security, to manage that infrastructure as a more holistic thing. And we see that changing the words that we use to describe this, right? Words are really important. Infrastructure as code is not enough in 2021. We see it more as policy as code at this point. And policy as code means that we can get all those teams involved, not just the traditional DevOps team there, but also security teams, compliance teams. We can bring them all under a single pipeline to manage our infrastructure holistically, with security, with infrastructure management, and all doing that with a single tool. That single tool is no longer Chef Infra, that is the Chef Enterprise Automation Stack. And that's the combination of all of our offerings together working as one. So how does that look? Again, if you're used to Chef Infra, this is a little bit of the same, but with different words. Words are important, and thinking about how we talk about more than just infrastructure is really important here. On the left, we have creating and testing policies. That's something we're going to do in Chef Workstation. We're going to go through and locally iterate on how we want our infrastructure to look, how we want our compliance to behave, security policies we have as an organization, iterate on that infrastructure, get it to a state that we think we can promote that, push that through pipelines. Then we're going to look on to the actual systems, and that's where we're talking about system state enforcement, right? You might have seen this in a traditional world being called, convergence. This is where our nodes converge. This is more about enforcing state at this point. That is our infrastructure state, services we want enabled, packages we want installed, but also security and compliance as well, right? We want to make sure that we have all the lockdowns we need everywhere across our environment in addition to those packages we might want installed. From there, we're going to report on that state, that infrastructure state, and that compliance state. And we're going to aggregate and validate that data up and automate. And we can also push that into other tools. We have integrations with tools like ServiceNow that allow you to bring that data that you have from your security and compliance and your infrastructure into those other tools so you can combine it. And with that, I'm going to pass you off to Trevor. He is going to talk a little bit more about what compliance looks like in Chef Infra.
Hey everybody, thanks Tim. So yeah, as Tim mentioned, I'm Trevor Hess. I'm another product manager here at Chef. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about compliance. If you're coming into our world from the sort of traditional view that Tim was talking about, if you're not bringing the security concerns left yet, or even if you're in the middle of shifting those concerns to the left, you have to have a better way to express the policy that you care about as an organization to deliver the business value that you have to your users safely and securely. So a few years ago, we acquired a company called VolcanoSec, which helped us launch our Inspect tool. As part of that, we created a language with which we could code our compliance policy as well. So we already had the language that you could use as part of Chef Infra to write and define the state that you want to apply to a system. And there were some ways you could use as part of that experience to validate that and test and confirm that that stuff was in that state, what Tim referred to as convergence earlier. With Inspect, you can actually apply specific code to test and validate those specific points of policy that you have. Over the past several years, and almost every day, there's a new announcement of somebody having some new security vulnerability or compliance issue or breach or hack or something in the news that's coming up. We've got an example here of companies that were affected by misconfigured Amazon S3 buckets, or the analogies in other cloud providers being storage accounts in Azure or storage buckets in GCP. Some of these companies were caught having S3 buckets that were misconfigured to be public instead of private. And because those went unnoticed, because nobody was testing the state of the configuration and validating it, that it was in the way that we expect it to be, that it was compliant with our policy to not have public buckets, these folks were caught with data exposed in a way that they didn't want it to be. So with Inspect, we can actually write controls to test this on an ongoing basis. So across all of our AWS buckets, we can write a control that's basically in plain English saying, I'm talking about an Amazon S3 bucket. It's called foo. First of all, part of my policy is it should be there. The other part of my policy is it shouldn't be public. And just like that, we now have a control that we can apply to our cloud configuration and to validate the state of that system to make sure it's compliant with the policies that we've applied and reduce the risk of our exposure to a breach or an oversight like that, like companies have seen in the past. So if we look a little bit deeper into, Tim, you want to bump over to the next slide. If we look a little bit deeper into that story, we're talking about managing our security and compliance. Tim mentioned the old way of doing state management and policy management on systems being spreadsheets. A lot of security work these days still falls into that, that spreadsheet model. And we want to help folks get to a place where that those elements of policy management are able to be managed as code and able to be collaborated on across teams. So by giving a framework by which we can create these controls that define what our policy is in a shareable way, we can drive collaboration across the organization to make sure that these pieces of policy are being applied in a consistent way that all teams can align on to agree on what the policy looks like. If we look at this sample here, you can see, again, another very close to plain English description in this control of what it is and what it does. We're saying it's a high impact piece. We shouldn't, if this fails, it is a problem for us. It's called do not install a telnet server. So this means we're talking about a control that states we're not installing a telnet server. It talks about what telnet is. It is tagged to be related to the sets of standards and the controls in those standards that it applies to so that we can track against our compliance and our audits. It contains references to where these standards come from, and it comes with the description of what it is and how to test it. We're talking about a package called Telnet, and we're saying it shouldn't be installed. So by having these controls expressed this way, we can put our policy through the same pipelines we drive our software and code through, which lets us scale out the application and the validation of our policy across our fleets in a much more broad way, helping us shift all of these compliance control concerns to the left as we move forward. And by putting that into dashboard and visibility systems, whether that's Automate or if you're using the data path for Automate to pipe that into other tools like ServiceNow, you've now got a comprehensive vision, not only using Infra to describe and define how to get to the state you expect, but you also have code out there that shows that you're actually validating that your policy has been applied the way that you expect it to be. Tim, if you go forward one more. Gartner has taken a lot of interest into this. They say compliance as code and infrastructure as code and continuous configuration automation are all valuable for ensuring the security and compliance of our fleets. And with that, we've always had a way by which you can apply these inspect controls as part of your cookbook workflow, but we're actually working on, and we're now looking for support in a compliance phase as part of our chef run. So Tim, if you want to talk a little bit about that, I'll pass the ball back to you.
Certainly. Thanks, Trevor. All right, so this is our new compliance phase. Like Trevor said, this is an extension of some of the existing functionality we had. If you're familiar with using compliance within Chef Infra runs, that was something you did with the audit cookbook, and you brought your inspect controls in through the audit cookbook. What we have here is a more integrated setup. We want this to be part of that new idea of policy and having Chef Infra Client being the tool that you use, the engine you use to derive not just your infrastructure policy, but also your compliance policy through your systems. So what exactly is the new compliance phase? Well, like I said, it's a replacement for the audit cookbook. If you're not a user of the audit cookbook, then you just don't have to know about that. You don't have to worry about the pains that are the audit cookbook at times. But this is a replacement for that. It brings that functionality natively into the Chef Infra client. It's fully backwards compatible. This is our goal. We want to make sure that this would be a really easy migration for folks that are currently on the audit cookbook. It's a really easy migration. You just take that audit cookbook off of your node, make sure you're not depending on it, you're not including the recipe anywhere in the system. And if you use those existing node audit attributes, you'll just get those controls that are defined within that. Why are we really excited about this? This is really about bringing a tighter integration, making the Chef Infra client the component that you use for all your configuration, bringing compliance into the client as a native part of that run. It's also really great because this is getting rid of a dependency, right? Out of the box, you're going to have compliance functionality without the need to bring the audit cookbook in. And that's really awesome. That means day one, implementing this, you don't have to worry about dependency solving. You don't have policy files or supermarkets, public or private supermarkets. You just don't have to worry about where that cookbook ever comes from because there isn't a cookbook, right? This is just a native thing that happens in your client. Kind of going off of that, that really simplifies the upgrade process. You don't have to worry about upgrading the audit cookbook as you upgrade your Chef Infra client. You're not going to have to worry as you do an upgrade to Chef 17 that you have an audit cookbook that is functioning with Chef 17 that also, functions with your existing 16 clients. Building that code right into the client means that we just get rid of a whole bunch of concerns around that. And the final component of that is that is just further reducing that dependency on the server. We don't have to fetch that data from the server, which means we don't have to put additional load on our server. We can better scale that server out. And if you're in a low or a high latency environment, this is going to be really important to you because you don't have to do that initial sync of that. We see a lot of people who, put out want compliance of systems that are out in these field branches, maybe a store or a restaurant, places where you have high security concerns because the systems aren't in a data center. So we really want to make sure that you can get compliance there without having to push cookbooks across, old DSL links that you might have out to a restaurant or something. What does the implementation look like of this? Well, it's really simple. Again, like I said, it's a backwards compatible transition. That is our goal, to make this something that people can adopt with ease. You're going to remove that audit cookbook from your run list. Make sure you're not depending on it in any of your cookbooks. Make sure you're not including it anywhere. And then you're going to run Chef Infra client just like you always did. There's no step 3 to this. It just runs. Below, you can see an actual run here that has a pretty simple sample compliance. This is a new runner that we have that's new in Chef 17. A really awesome community member put this together. Gives you output that looks really similar to like using inspec profiles within a test kitchen run. So you can see this right in your logs. You also get all the existing runners that you might be familiar with. So you can push data to your Chef server to get into Automate. You can push data directly into Automate. You can push data to a JSON file that you want to parse it on disk in some other tool. We have a whole bunch of different ways that you can interact with that data. You have all of your existing fetchers. So if you have compliance profiles as part of a cookbook, if you have compliance profiles that are on disk, on remote files or Git, you can still grab all the data from those same places. You have all the same functionality that you had in the audit cookbook plus a little bit more. And we really hope to expand that out as we go on. Because now this is part of the Chef Infra client, which makes it a lot easier for us to integrate the two together and give you a really nice seamless experience. So what is the status of this? Well, we dark launched this feature in Chef 16.9, started merging that functionality in, saw some improvements in 16.10. We're looking at the moment for early adopters being people who already have the audit cookbook in use. We want to see from those folks how this functions for them. We want to know if there's any issues before we take it GA in Chef Infra client 17. What does GA mean? Because like I said, it's already in the client already. Well, GA means this is going to be our path going forward. We don't see a continued maintenance of the audit cookbook. We won't get new features there. This is how we see compliance working in Chef Infra client in a nice integrated fashion. We also have a bunch of docs. We want to make sure that this is super well documented on our doc site. So as you go through, you can see exactly how to write your first compliance profile, how to get it, how to bring it into your pipelines, and how to test that all and take it all together. Final little bit, we do have a discourse, the Chef Questions discourse. We have a channel specifically in that called Chef Release Announcements. If you want to know about all these releases, you want to see as we release features like this, 16.9, 16.10, you want to see when we release 17, you can subscribe to that. You can view it on the website, and you can get those straight in your mailbox, and you can make sure that you only get just the release announcements. It's a really, really handy way to make sure you stay up to date with everything we're working on. Because we're going to have a whole bunch of great new functionality like this coming out in the future. And with that, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. And we can look and see if we have any questions that we can answer.
You do have some questions, Tim. So this first one kind of came in while you were answering it, but I want to make sure that we talk to it specifically. So which version of Chef Client or Infra server has the compliance mode built into it?
Yeah, this feature launched in 16.9. We improved it a little bit in 16.10. So if you fetched the latest version of 16.10 that's up on the download site right now, you would have this feature in it. It's also improved a little bit in 17. Like we haven't backported to 16, that new report feature I showed there. So that's a brand new reporter. We'll probably see some additional functionality that will be just in 17 as well as we go forward. As far as what server you need, I don't think that there's actually a server requirement. There's a few different ways you can report data through this. The recommended one that I would have is just to push data straight into Automate. You can also proxy data through your Chef server. There is a required Chef server release for that. I was just reading it in our documentation yesterday. I don't remember what it was. It's like a Chef server that's been released in the last, I think 2 years. So if you're on a new version of Chef server 13, 14, you can use all the features you need for this. But realistically, even like older 12 releases probably work fine.
Awesome. Next question. Where do the profiles get defined in this new paradigm with the compliance space? Previously, they were in the audit cookbook, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways. So there's a concept of a reporter, and that's where you send the data, and then a fetcher. So where that data is coming from. And there's a whole bunch of different places that data can come from. That's one of the things we're kind of trying to explore about how people see that working, where people want to fetch that data from. The example I had was fetching it using a URL, but you can fetch it through Git, and I think you can fetch it through cookbooks, on disk. There's a bunch of different places. So we're curious about how people's pipelines of compliance data and infrastructure data work together, and where they would like to see that data really flow from.
Next question is there already documentation about this, or is the documentation not out yet?
The documentation is in a PR that is being worked on right now. So there is not documentation up on this right now. Yeah, at the moment, this is very much, ideal for a person who already has the audit cookbook in place. Like I said, you can take the audit cookbook off your node, take it out of the metadata, take any include recipes out, and then it'll just automatically flip over to this new mode. And there shouldn't be any transition that has to happen there. As far as new users, that's really what we're GAing in Chef Infra Client 17. That's when we're going to have full documentation. This is going to be really a first-class citizen on our docs about infrastructure and compliance right there. So we make sure that people can go through that process and get it set up. We don't want anyone to ever have to go to a Git repo again in order to get docs. And that was kind of where the audit cookbook was.
Next question is, can you go back a slide so that we can write down the discourse URL?
Yeah, totally.
Um,
and you can just go straight to discourse.chef.io. There's a little pull down menu that'll get you to that further URL.
Next question is, for configuring compliance, do you use the same attributes that were defined in the audit cookbook? And will those attribute names change to compliance instead of audit?
Yeah, right now, like I said, our goal is to make sure that we're fully backwards compatible, and that's going to mean that everything is configured the same way it was with the audit cookbook. That's really important for us to make sure that this is a drop-in replacement, folks. Um, we do want to extend this in the future. Does that mean that we're going to rename the attributes? Very likely. Very likely that those attributes will rename. It has to be something that's done in a backwards compatible way, though. We want to make sure that you can continue to give either one of them and it'll work. Uh, audit doesn't really mean anything, you know, especially as we talk about users that going forward aren't aware of the audit cookbook. When you say that you put your compliance configs in the audit section, maybe not the best experience. I think you'll see more there as we develop this and kind of take it into like the V2 of how compliance functionality works.
Awesome. The next question I'll take, and that's, do you have any compliance specific cookbooks, I'll say profiles for Docker images? So we do have some content we're starting to work on for deeper Docker support, but that would be covered in another session at a different time. But if you reach out to your account team, they'll be able to connect you with us, and we can have a deeper conversation about what you're looking for there. Another question that came in is, do the Infra server and client need to be on the same version?
Yeah, no, never. Yeah, Infra client, the latest version of Infra client is 16.10. The latest version of Infra server, as of this morning, is 14.0. Hopefully this afternoon it'll be 14.1. They don't match up, and that's by design, right? We want to make sure that we aren't forcing people to upgrade to a new major version of the server. We only bump that version when there's an actual breaking change that would require you to do something in the upgrade, either a tough upgrade or a config change you have to make or something like that. So will you see a 15 or a 16 of server? Probably at some point, but not just to keep up with the versions of the client.
Getting a few more popping in here. If a user or customer missed this webinar, how will they learn that the audit cookbook pattern is being deprecated? Is that just the Chef client release notes?
Yeah, that's going to be part of that release of 17. You're going to see a lot more about this functionality. It's one of our big features. You'll see that, you know, on our documentation. You'll see another question about Learn Chef. You'll see that in Learn Chef going forward. This is the pattern that we're going to be showing people. You'll see that in the audit cookbook. Eventually, I think we'll deprecate the audit cookbook. I don't want to say that we're deprecating it today, because if there was a bug in that, we're certainly going to fix it. We just aren't going to do additional development of features there. But we're going to make sure that this is something that we communicate in as many places as we can, because we're pretty excited about this as a significant improvement over the old experience of having a cookbook you got to kind of lug around.
Just checking to see what other questions we've got left. Let's see. Will there be a course on Learn Chef to have hands-on learning for this change?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, like I was saying, that's what we expect to get as part of this documentation. As we go and update that content, you know, it won't be focused around the audit cookbook. It'll be focused around compliance phase. So, yeah.
All right, I think that is all of our questions.
Cool. All right, well, thanks for coming, everybody. I hope this is interesting to everyone. I hope this is an exciting feature that gets people pumped for 17. Like I said, if you're an existing audit cookbook user, we'd love for you to give it a try. Reach out, feel free to message me about this. Feel free to file issues if you run into problems. We'd love to get some feedback on how this is working for everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tim and Trevor, and thank you to our attendees for all the questions. Once again, the on-demand version will be available by tomorrow, and you will receive an email as soon as it's ready. So with that, thanks again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all.